Welcome back. These are notes for the struggle for power in England. Okay, so with the death of Edward the Confessor, England loses their king. They are left looking around, being like, well, now what do we do? Okay, because Edward the Confessor did not have any children, he did not have any direct heirs. Instead, he had promised the throne or the kingdom of England to his cousin. Okay? His cousin's name was William. Only problem with that was that William was the Duke of Normandy, meaning William was a French dude. Okay? People in England, people in France, not the best of friends. So the Anglo-Saxons in England were not happy that William of Normandy had been promised this crown or this title. So instead, they decided to elect their own king, their own English king. So they selected Edward's brother-in-law, Harold Godwinson, to be king instead. So now England went from having no king to two kings. This led to a claim for the throne in England. As if having two people competing for the throne wasn't enough, Harold, the King of Norway, decides to throw his hat into the ring as well. Harald Hardrada of the King of Norway claimed to be direct descendant of Edward and said that he was willing to fight for the English throne as well, because being the King of Norway wasn't enough for him. Okay. This leads to the Battle of Stamford Bridge. Okay, and here at this battle, you have the two heralds that fight. Okay, Harold, the King of Norway, and Harold Godwinson, brother-in-law to Edward. Okay. What ends up happening is Harold Godwinson, the brother-in-law, ends up defeating Harold, the King of Norway. Okay. Harold, the King of Norway, turns around, sails back to Norway, tail between his legs, says, it's okay, I still have my own country anyways. So that leads us to Harold Godwinson versus William of Normandy. Okay? Determined to be king, William of Normandy decides to set sail from Normandy, right, which is along the coast of France, to England. Now remember, what's important about Normandy is although Normandy is in France, it's technically an English territory. Okay, so it's like a small group of English people that live in France that really identify as being French, but they basically belong to England. Normandy becomes a really hotbed topic or an area of contention later on, as we will see, where the English and the French are constantly fighting over it. Anyways, so determined to be king, William decides to get a bunch of his knights on the board of ships and then sail across the English Channel to go fight Harold for the King of England. This leads us to something that is called the Battle of Hastings. Okay, this battle took place in 1066, and what the outcome of this battle is that William of Normandy wins this battle. So he defeats Harold Godwinson, the brother-in-law of Edward, okay, the one that the English had elected to be their king. He ends up defeating him, and he becomes known as William the Conqueror, right? Because he sailed from Normandy to England, defeated the English king nominee, and has now proclaimed himself to be the King of England. This is important because when William did this and he was able to claim victory and become the King of England, he brought with him Norman culture and laws and introduced them to England. So he brought with them some of these French ideas and these French customs. Okay, and we see the English language begin to evolve, where you have French words that begin to blend with English words. And we have the feudal system that now is able to begin in England. Okay, so William takes this idea of feudalism, this idea of people protecting small villages or manors and paying taxes to a king to provide that protection, from France to now being instituted in England. This will secure England and provide them some stability so they're not continually taken over by different groups of people. William also creates something that is called the Domesday Book. The Domesday Book was actually something positive, even though it sounds super negative. What the Domesday Book did, or what it was basically like the first version of the census. Okay, this year, all of your families should have taken the 2020 census. It happens every 10 years where the government collects information about how many people live in your house, what you do, how old you are, how long have you lived there, things like that. It's just a record-keeping system to see who lives where, who lives in our country. Okay, well, our modern census is a direct derivative from this Domesday Book that William created. So what William had people do is people went throughout England and they began to survey the land, or kind of like take an observation, take a look at what was happening throughout England, and they began to track the amount of land that people had and then the number of cattle that they owned. And based on one's amount of land and cattle, they revised or reformed the tax system. So people that had more land and more cattle paid more in taxes because they could afford more, right? They had more revenue coming in from their farmland and their animals. Okay, so fast forward past William the Conqueror, and we enter King John. Okay, King John was a descendant of William, meaning same family line. And when John comes to power, he wants to raise taxes. Okay? He wants to earn more money to support his epic conquests. And he wants to be able to go off and do things. And this really upsets the nobles throughout England. Okay? They are not happy with King John's raising taxes whenever he felt like it, because he had a desire to go fight some random people in Europe. Okay? They said, no. It doesn't work like that. Okay? You can't just raise taxes when you feel like it. There has to be a legitimate reason behind it, and there has to be a benefit or a need throughout our country for this raised tax. Okay? Your frivolous idea to just go off on a conquest is not a valid reason. So what they do is they end up forcing King John to sign something that is called the Magna Carta. Okay? And the Magna Carta is signed in the year 1215, and it limits the power of the monarch. So it limits King John's ability to raise taxes. Okay? It limits his ability to build random palaces. So it's a series of checks and balances, okay, which our government currently uses as well, right? Our government and the checks and the balances, so the checks on what our federal administrations can and cannot do, again, are directly derived from the early versions of the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta also introduced a jury trial system, okay, where when you are accused of a crime, you are put in front of a jury of your peers, right? And you plead your case and people decide, are you innocent or are you guilty? So it's based on factual evidence, not just a random, well, you're guilty because I said so. The Magna Carta also reformed the tax system. And the most important thing about the Magna Carta is that it left the medieval church alone. So this is where we see a separation of church and state. The Magna Carta governs the abilities of the monarch in Europe. It has nothing to do with the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is its own institution, and they have their own rules and regulations. So they are not at all guided or shaped by this legal document, meaning they can still go do whatever they want to do. Instead, the Magna Carta simply governs the abilities of the monarch. It tells the government system what they can and cannot do. Then we have the introduction of Parliament versus common law. Okay? Parliament was the representative government in England. And what the Magna Carta did is it outlined what Parliament was and was not able to do. Okay, so it kind of gave them a step-by-step guide of how they were to function or how they were to govern England. And revolts in the 1260s led to the creation of the two houses in Parliament, the House of the Lords and the House of the Commons. So the House of the Lords were made up of nobles and clergy, so aka rich people, and the House of the Commons were made up of the rest of everybody else. Okay, so just like in our government system, right, we have the House and the Senate, and the House and the Senate are modeled after English Parliament with the House of the Lords and the House of the Commons. Okay, so it's the first version of representative government in England. Then you also have the creation of common law. So courts were set up under King Edward I, and these courts consisted of a whole bunch of trials and juries and recording of information from cases. And this info was used to create a common law, or cases that applied to all citizens in England. So if Bob stole a cow in the northeastern part of England and Sam stole a cow in the southwestern part of England, they would both be punished in the same way. Okay? They both would have common law that dictated what their punishment would be. It would be like if you get a speeding ticket today, okay? It doesn't matter if you get a speeding ticket on Jamaica or if you get a speeding ticket on Hinton, okay? If you were going the same speed in both places, your ticket's going to be for the same amount. And this is the idea of common law, so cases that apply to all citizens throughout England. And what was important about common law was that it was a living law, meaning that it was able to be changed depending on the needs of the people, which was different from previous Roman law from statutes. Okay, so previous Roman law from statutes said this is set in stone, this is what happens, whereas common law or living law takes into account like what is happening in society, and it has the availability to change kind of depending on where England is at. So if England is in a time of crisis or they're in a time of famine, they might relax some laws in terms of food production, versus if England is in times of stability, they might restrict some of their laws on certain aspects. So the law system within England is really starting to develop and change and work in the favor of the common people, and it's becoming more standardized. So it doesn't really matter who you are or where you live, you have laws that apply to everybody. Okay, so your summary question is, was the signing of the Magna Carta a good or bad thing? Okay, what do you think? Remember, the Magna Carta limits the powers of the monarch and gives rights and responsibilities to the nobles and the common people. Okay, so it kind of dictates or outlines what kings and queens can and cannot do in England. So what do you think? Was this a good thing or was it a bad thing?